clicking. This is an intro for a brand new project. This is A Court of Pans and Empties. It is a Pantastic Ladies project that was created by Paula of A Beauty Guru Made Me Do It. It starts today on February 15th and it ends on September 6th. I'm not sure what the significance of the dates is, but the updates are on the 15th of the month. And this project is themed around the book A Court of Thorns and Roses by Sarah J. Maas, which is this one right here, which I did read about 2 years ago. It was right before Valentine's Day, 2 years ago is when I read it. So it's been almost exactly 2 years. And I just couldn't pass this project up because in her little spiel on the Pantastic Ladies page on Facebook, Paula talked about how this series got her reading again. And I did the same thing. I read a lot when I was in high school and it was mostly fantasy. 2 years ago, I did a book exchange with some strangers online. We all sent each other 2 books. I got Elantris by Brandon Sanderson, which I also really liked. And of course I got A Court of Thorns and Roses. And I devoured it and knew I needed to read the rest of the series, which I did, and then some. So this intro is going to be completely spoiler-free, just in case you haven't read it or you're in the early stages of reading the series. I don't want to give anything away, so don't worry, this is a safe video to watch. However, I am not going to promise that for the updates, so I'm going to just warn you about that I may talk about things that could spoil things from A Court of Thorns and Roses the book, A Court of Thorns and Roses the series, and anywhere in the Mossverse. If the term Mossverse is unfamiliar to you, then watch till the end of the video because after I introduce the panning aspect of this project, I'm going to talk about some things that I think first-time readers of A Court of Thorns and Roses should know if they don't already. And so I'll be going into that and the Mossverse will be part of that. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce the way I'm doing this project now. You can work on up to 10 of the prompts at a time, I believe is what Paula said. I'm picking 5 and they were random, and I will be doing this as a progressive style. So if I get to an update and I can't roll anything out, I'm going to bring a random prompt in anyway. But I do have my first 5 random prompts. I'm not going to spend much time talking about the characters in this video because I did promise that this would be spoiler-free, and it will be, but I'm going to go through the 5 that I drew. My first prompt is Nesta Archeron, and she is a very polarizing character. She is represented by something with flames or something that's red, yellow, and orange. She is frequently associated with fire. And so I am going to bring in this Fenty Beauty Gloss Bomb Heat in the shade Hot Cherry. It is a red lip gloss, and I think I'm capturing the essence of the prompt there. My goal is going to be use this 10 times for Nesta. My second prompt is Lucian, and he's represented by a face mask. Everyone in Spring Court is wearing masks. And so I do have a face mask in another project to finish. I'm going to be bringing sheet masks in here for Lucian. These are the Aceology Multivitamin Brightening Biodegradable Masks. I think it says there is 3 of them in here, and my goal is going to be to finish this for Lucian. Next I have Amarantha, and she is described as having very pale skin and very red lips. So she is a vampy lip product. This is the Beauty Crop PBJ Smoothie Stick Creamy Lip Crayon in the shade Guava Nice Day. And I really like this lip color, but it is pretty vampy. It's kind of a berry tone. This is what I'm going with. I'm going to use this 10 times for Amarantha. Next is the Spring Court, and you wear pastel colors in the spring, right? So Spring Court is something that is a pastel color product. This is the Nature Lab Perfect Repair Hair Mask. It is a pastel green, if you can see there. I've used this a little bit. It is where that brown line is, and I am going to finish this for Spring Court. And my last one is Alice. I believe that's how you say her name. She is represented by a product used for grooming or cleaning. She is sort of a handmaiden of sorts, and so she helps to keep people presentable for court. I'm bringing in, wouldn't you know it, the Nature Lab Perfect Repair Shampoo, and I'm going to finish this for Alice. I'm right there. I'm not going to be marking this bottle, and that's because I actually have a refill for this, so I'm not going to put marks on it, and my goal is to finish what is currently in here, not the refill, because that would take me forever, but this is what I'm going to use up for Alice. So those are my 5 products that I'm going to be working on, and I will check in a month to see how we're doing. But right now I'm going to take this opportunity to talk about books because I like talking about books. And there won't be any spoilers in here, but I am going to go through some things that you may want to know the first time you pick up A Court of Thorns and Roses, because I didn't. And I think this might be helpful for some people who are less familiar. The first thing that I want to suggest is to not Google things With fantasy series, it's really easy to want to Google a character because you know you've seen them before, but you don't really remember them. Don't do that. There are wiki pages for all of the Court of Thorns and Roses characters, and so you will likely see spoilers if you do that because they are all current with the Mossverse. Yeah, I used that word again and I'll get back to it later, don't worry. Similarly, in general, I recommend not following authors on social media unless you're current with the books they have already published. My sister-in-law was reading the second Crescent City book right before the third one was going to be released, and she was following Sarah J. Maas on social media, and so she saw some things that were actually major spoilers for the second Crescent City book. And so I was doing all sorts of logical gymnastics trying to make her forget what it was that she read and pretend that it would make sense in a different way than how I knew it did. So don't do that. Wait until you're current on everything an author has written before you follow them. They do tend to promote their upcoming books by releasing statements that could spoil their past ones. And now I'm going to explain what the Mossverse actually is. It is pretty well established and understood that Sarah J. Maas has written or is writing 3 different series, and they all take place in the same universe. So there are things that you might find that might allude to a different series, which is kind of cool. The first of the 3 is Throne of Glass. That series is actually completed. There are going to be no more Throne of Glass books. That story is done. There are 7 books plus a prequel. I personally recommend reading the prequel after the 3rd book. I read it after the 4th one, and I don't think that was quite right, but I actually don't recommend reading it first because I think it has more emotional impact if you already know who the characters are and what their relationships are with each other. The other thing that's a little bit interesting about the reading order is that the 5th and 6th books actually happen concurrently. It is pretty common in fantasy novels for authors to use different characters' perspectives at different times to give the reader the best view of the action. And so in this case, the characters are in 2 different locations, and you're seeing different parts of the story that are happening at the same time from different characters' points of view. There is a way, and you can find lists online of how to do this, where you can mark off certain chapters and switch between the 2 in order to read the story in chronological order between the different viewpoints. I did this when I read this series, and I actually kind of wish I hadn't. My opinion is not the popular one. Most people would recommend reading it that way, but I think that I would have been more invested in the story if I wasn't paying attention to, okay, I need to switch books now. If I had just read them in the publishing order, I think I would have had a better reading experience, but most people disagree with me on that, so make your own decision. The entire Throne of Glass series is set in the world of Aurelia. This series is actually a little bit different than the other 2 in that I would categorize it as young adult. The other 2 series by Sarah J. Maas that I'll talk about, I would call adult level. They contain mature content that may not be appropriate for younger readers, and by that I mean sexual content. So I would have no problem handing Throne of Glass to a 14-year-old. I wouldn't necessarily do that with the other 2 series. The second series, of course, is A Court of Thorns and Roses. There are currently 5 books in this series, but it is ongoing. The next book that Sarah J. Maas publishes is supposed to be the 6th in this series. There are some people who think of A Court of Thorns and Roses as being currently 4 books with a novella. Some people don't think of A Court of Frost and Starlight as being part of the series. I don't think that makes sense. It is shorter and it doesn't have the same dramatic action that you see in the other books, but it is definitely chronologically 4th, and it references events that happened in A Court of War and Ruin, and then A Court of Silver Flames talks about things that happened in A Court of Frost and Starlight. So it's definitely not a standalone book, and it occurs in the order that it was published in. So I think of it as being number 4 in the series. A Court of Thorns and Roses, called ACOTAR for short, takes place in the world of Prythian. We primarily see this through the eyes of Feyre Archeron. Again, sometimes the point of view changes. The book A Court of Thorns and Roses very much starts out as a retelling of a story that you're probably already familiar with, but it does diverge from that inspiration and becomes its own story. And then the 3rd series is Crescent City. Crescent City is a little bit of a different setting. The characters still have magic, they're still fae, but also they have smartphones. This was the first urban fantasy I ever read, and I found it a whole lot more interesting than I thought I would. A friend talked me into Crescent City. I initially hadn't been all that interested, but I'm really glad that she did. Crescent City currently has 3 books. It takes place in the land of Midgard, And our main protagonist, who is our primary storyteller, is Bryce Quinlan. She is kind of your modern party girl. So she's a little bit different too. There are some people who find her to be frustrating or annoying, and I can understand why, but I think the story is worth it. In terms of reading order, I strongly recommend reading both Throne of Glass and A Court of Thorns and Roses before you read Crescent City. That is to say, the entire series of Throne of Glass and ACOTAR. The world of Crescent City is more complicated, and I think that having read Sarah J. Maas's other works and becoming familiar with how the Fae function and what they really are is very helpful before you are introduced to the social complexes of Crescent City. So those are the three parts of the Maasverse, and while it is pretty well established that yes, all three of those stories are taking place within the same universe, what's not really understood is the timeline. There is a lot of debate over whether all of those series are happening concurrently or if some of them happened in the past. I don't think that's particularly clear, to be honest with you. I think there's evidence that points to a couple of different directions. I tend to lean to thinking that they are all happening concurrently. I promise no spoilers, so I'm not going to go into the details as of why, but I tend to think that they are happening concurrently. I think there's some things that make more sense if they are happening at the same time. And I have a theory about that. It's pretty involved, and I would have to give you a lot of spoilers to go into that, so I'm not going to. Something that is also not currently clear is whether you really need to read all of them. Both ACOTAR and Crescent City are ongoing series. They're not complete yet. So as of right now, you can just read ACOTAR by itself and you don't need to read anything else. We don't know if that's going to be true going forward. As I said, the next book being written is going to be the 6th ACOTAR book, and we don't know if the events in Crescent City are influencing that or not. So those were just some things that I thought that maybe people might want to know when they pick up ACOTAR for the first time. I was not aware of the Maasverse the first time I did, but I was perfectly happy to read everything else as it turned out. I enjoyed all of it, and so I really didn't mind discovering that. If I said anything that's confusing or if you have any questions, you can go ahead and ask. I have not decided yet if I want to talk about ACOTAR after every panning update like this, or if this is just going to be a one-time thing. If you have feedback and you either would like to talk more about books, let me know, or if you think I should just shut up, you should let me know that too. It's okay. But if you've put up with me this long, congratulations. I have a lot of respect for you, and I will see you next month in some capacity. Bye.